The screaming started again at dawn. Emperor stood at the window of his palace, watching the twin suns rise over his capital city. Behind him, somewhere in the eastern wing, he could hear the chaos, the crash of furniture, the roar of small flames, the terrified shouts of yet another caretaker. He closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath. Smoke curled from his nostrils. For 8,000 years, the imperial bloodline had never produced triplets. The birth of 3 hatchlings at once was supposed to be a blessing. The priests had celebrated. The empire had rejoiced. Fireworks had lit up the skies of 100 worlds. Now, 3 months later, the emperor wondered if the gods were playing a cruel joke on him. The door to his chamber opened. His chief advisor, an old draconian named, entered with his head bowed low. His ceremonial robes were singed at the edges. This was not unusual anymore. "Your Majesty," said carefully, "the caretaker has resigned." The emperor did not turn from the window. "That is the 47th. "Yes, Your Majesty." "What happened this time?" Hesitated. "The small one, Ember. He became frightened when she entered the nursery. He released fire. The other 2 joined him. She barely escaped." The emperor finally turned. He was massive, even by draconian standards. His scales were deep crimson, marked with gold along the ridges of his face. His eyes burned like molten copper. He had conquered 12 star systems. He had crushed rebellions with a single command. He had made entire civilizations kneel before him. And he could not control 3 bobbies. "Where is my mate?" he asked. "The Empress is in the nursery. She is trying to calm them." The emperor walked past his advisor without another word. His claws clicked against the obsidian floor as he moved through the palace corridors. Guards bowed as he passed. Servants pressed themselves against the walls. No one met his eyes. He reached the nursery wing and found it in chaos. Scorch marks covered the walls. A medical droid lay in pieces on the floor, still sparking. 3 servants were using fire suppressors on the smoldering curtains. Through the reinforced door he could hear them, his children crying. It was not a sound of anger, it was fear, pure, terrible fear. The Empress stood outside the door, her scales pale with exhaustion. She was smaller than her mate, her scales a deep blue that shifted to purple in the light. She had not slept properly in weeks. Neither of them had. "They will not let me near them," she said quietly. "Every time I enter, they panic more." The emperor stood beside her and looked through the viewing window. Inside the nursery, 3 small shapes huddled in the far corner. The largest stood in front of his siblings with his wings spread wide. He was trying to protect them, even though he was barely the size of a large dog. Small flames flickered around his mouth. His eyes were wild with terror. Behind him, pressed against the wall, she was the clever one, always watching, always calculating. But right now she was just a scared baby, trembling so hard her scales rattled. And in the very back, almost hidden by his siblings, was Ember, the runt, the smallest. He was half the size of the others, his scales a pale orange that should have deepened to red by now. He was making a sound that broke the emperor's heart, a high, thin wail of pure distress. "Why are they so afraid?" the emperor asked. "We have given them everything, the finest nursery, the best caretakers, the most advanced medical care in the galaxy." The empress shook her head. "I do not know. The physicians say their flame glands develop too early. They cannot control the fire. When they feel fear, they burn, and everything makes them afraid." The emperor pressed his clawed hand against the window. On the other side, saw the movement and released a burst of plasma fire. It splashed against the reinforced glass, leaving a black stain. "My son," the emperor whispered, "I am your father, I would never hurt you." But could not understand. He was too young. All he knew was that large shapes kept entering his space, making loud sounds, filling the room with strange smells. His instincts screamed danger, and his body responded the only way it knew how. Behind the emperor cleared his throat. Your Majesty, the Council has made another suggestion. I do not want to hear it. They believe that perhaps the hatchlings should be separated, kept in individual chambers, sedated until their emotional development catches up with their physical abilities. The Emperor turned slowly, his eyes blazed. My children are not problems to be solved. They are not prisoners to be locked away. Bowed lower. Of course, Your Majesty, I merely relay the Council's words. The Empress stepped forward. There must be another way. Somewhere in the galaxy, someone must know how to help them. Paused. There is one possibility. The Galactic Union maintains a registry of caregivers, specialists who work with dangerous young from various species. The Emperor's lip curled. You want me to bring an alien into the Imperial Nursery to care for the heirs of the Draconis throne? I want our children to live, the Empress said sharply. I want them to stop being afraid every moment of their existence. I do not care who helps them. The Emperor looked at his mate. Then he looked through the window at his children. Ember's wailing had grown weaker now. He was exhausting himself. Soon he would fall into an uneasy sleep, only to wake screaming again in a few hours. This was not living. This was survival, and even that might not last much longer. The Imperial physician had warned them. The stress was damaging the hatchling's development. If something did not change soon, there could be permanent harm, physical, mental, perhaps both. The Emperor had never felt helpless before. He had armies at his command, fleets that could darken the skies of any world, weapons that could crack planets in half, but none of that power could help him now. None of it could comfort three terrified Bobbies. Search the registry, he said finally. Find someone, anyone. I do not care what species they are. I do not care what it costs. He placed his hand against the window one more time. On the other side, his children huddled together, small puffs of smoke rising from their nostrils. Just save my children. The transport ship landed on the palace grounds at midday. It was a small vessel, designed for passenger travel rather than war. The Imperial guards watched it with suspicion as it settled onto the landing pad. The ramp lowered, and a single figure walked out. Was not impressive to look at. She was 53 years old with gray streaks in her black hair and deep lines around her eyes. She stood about 5.5 feet tall, which meant she barely reached the chest of the smallest Draconian guard. She wore simple clothes, dark pants, a comfortable shirt, practical shoes. She carried one small bag over her shoulder. The guards looked at each other. This was the specialist, this soft, scaleless creature. Captain, the head of palace security, stepped forward. He towered over the human woman, his red scales gleaming in the sunlight. You are the nurse. That's me, she said. Her voice was calm and pleasant. She looked up at him without any sign of fear. Nice planet you have here. Bit warm for my taste, but the architecture is beautiful. Did not know what to say. He had expected someone more impressive. Someone with obvious weapons or advanced technology or at least protective armor. This woman looked like she might work in a small shop somewhere, selling tea or flowers. Follow me, he said stiffly. The Emperor wishes to meet you before you see the hatchlings. Nodded and followed him across the landing pad. She walked with an easy pace, looking around at everything with obvious interest. The palace rose before them, all black stone and sharp angles, built to intimidate. Dragons carved from obsidian lined the walkway, their jaws open in silent roars. Paused to look at one of them. Lovely detail work, she commented. Stared at her. Those statues are meant to inspire fear in visitors. Oh, they're very scary, agreed cheerfully, but the craftsmanship is still excellent. The guards exchanged confused glances as they continued walking. The throne room was vast. Pillars of black stone rose toward a ceiling lost in shadow. Flames burned in massive braziers along the walls, casting dancing light across everything. At the far end, on a throne carved from a single piece of volcanic glass, sat Emperor. Walked forward without hesitation. When she reached the appropriate distance, she gave a small, respectful bow. Not deep, not groveling, just polite. "Your Majesty," she said, "thank you for inviting me." The Emperor studied her. His eyes moved over her small frame, her lack of natural weapons, her fragile skin. He had conquered species far more impressive than this one. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as clever but weak. They had no claws, no scales, no venom. They could not breathe fire or survive in vacuum or regenerate lost limbs. They were, by most standards, one of the most physically limited sentient species in existence. "You believe you can help my children," he said. It was not a question. "I believe I can try," replied. "I've worked with difficult cases before. Our caregivers were the finest in the Empire. They all failed. With respect, Your Majesty, that doesn't mean the problem is unsolvable. It might just mean no one has found the right approach yet." The Emperor leaned forward. "I read your file. You spent 6 months caring for larvae." "I did." "Are made of living flame. How did you survive?" Smiled slightly, very carefully and with a lot of burn cream. She paused. But the burns weren't the hard part. The hard part was learning what they needed. Bobbies need specific fuel mixtures and temperature ranges. They need certain light frequencies. Once I figured that out, the rest was just patience. Empress spoke from her smaller throne beside her mate. "Our children are not simply difficult. They are dangerous. They have injured 32 caretakers. They have destroyed everything in their nursery multiple times. They are terrified every waking moment, and we do not know why." Turned to face the Empress. "May I ask some questions?" "You may." "How old were the hatchlings when the problem started?" The Empress thought back. "Almost immediately after hatching, within the first few days." "Were they like this while still in the eggs?" "No, they were peaceful, content." "What changed when they hatched?" The Empress frowned. "We moved them to the nursery. We assigned caretakers. The priests performed the blessing ceremonies. We followed all the traditional protocols." Nodded slowly. "And these protocols, they involve a lot of noise, bright lights, many people coming and going." "Of course, it is how things are done. It has always been how things are done." "I see." Was quiet for a moment. "Before I decide if I can help, I'd like to observe the hatchlings. Just watch them for a while. Would that be acceptable?" The Emperor waved his clawed hand. "We'll take you to the observation room. But know this, human. If you waste our time, if you are here seeking glory or money without true skill, I will not be forgiving." Met his burning eyes without flinching. "Your Majesty, I'm not here for glory. I'm here because there are 3 scared bobbies who need help. Everything else is just details." For a long moment the Emperor said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. Led through the palace to the observation room beside the nursery. Through a reinforced window, she could see the hatchlings for the first time. They were huddled in the corner as always, stood guard, watched the window with calculating eyes. Ember made his endless, heartbreaking sound of distress. Stood very still. She watched them for a long time. She noticed how they flinched when a sound came from outside. She noticed how their scales changed color when they were stressed. She noticed how they pressed together, seeking comfort from each other because they could find it nowhere else. She noticed most of all how small they really were, how young, how lost. "Oh, you poor things," she murmured. Stood behind her. "Will you accept the position?" Did not look away from the hatchlings. "Yes," she said softly, "I'll take it." The others did not last more than a few days. Most did not last one. Finally turned to face him. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held something fierce, something determined. "I'm not the others." On the first day, sets hair on fire. It happened within an hour of her entering the nursery. She had taken one step too close, and the largest hatchling panicked. A burst of plasma shot from his mouth, catching the side of her head. The fire suppressant system activated immediately, but not before she lost a good portion of her hair on the right side. The palace physicians rushed to treat her. The burns were not severe, but they expected her to resign immediately. Everyone did. Instead, asked for a pair of scissors, cut her remaining hair short to match, and went back to work. On the second day, destroyed her medical kit. The middle hatchling had discovered that she could generate focused heat from her claws. When set down her bag to make some notes, crept forward and melted it into a shapeless lump of plastic and metal. Then she retreated to her corner, looking almost proud of herself. Sighed, ordered a replacement kit, and made a mental note about its clever problem-solving abilities. On the third day, Ember would not stop crying. The smallest hatchling's wail filled the nursery from morning until night. It was a high, piercing sound that seemed to vibrate in its bones. Every time Ember cried, his siblings became more stressed, and when they became stressed, they breathed fire. By the end of the third day, his fireproof suit had 7 new burn marks. Her replacement medical kit was destroyed, and the nursery walls were black with fresh scorch marks. The court watched through the surveillance feeds. Bets were placed on how long she would last. 3 days, most said. A week at the very most. She is stubborn, observed to the emperor, but stubbornness alone will not save her. The emperor said nothing. He watched the small human woman on the screen, surrounded by chaos and flame, calmly writing in a notebook. Was indeed writing. She was recording everything she observed, every trigger that caused fear, every small behavior that might be important. She had filled 30 pages already. She noticed that the hatchlings calmed slightly when the lights were dim. Not much, but a little. Their scales shifted from stress red to something closer to neutral. She noticed that they reacted worse to high-pitched sounds, the beeping of medical equipment, the chirp of communication devices, the formal announcements that played whenever someone entered the nursery. She noticed that sudden movements terrified them. When a caretaker walked quickly or reached toward them without warning, they panicked. She noticed that Ember was the key. He was the most sensitive of the 3. When he became frightened, his distress spread to his siblings like a disease. If she could calm Ember, she might be able to calm them all. Most importantly, she noticed the feeding protocols. Every feeding time, a team of draconian attendants entered the nursery in formal procession. They wore ceremonial robes. They announced themselves with traditional words. They moved in precise, ritualized patterns passed down through generations. And every feeding time, the hatchlings went into complete panic. Watch this happen 3 times before she understood what she was seeing. The protocols were designed for adult draconians. They were meant to show respect, to honor the imperial bloodline. But to 3 infant minds they were overwhelming. Too many beings, too much noise, too much movement. On the 4th night, did not sleep. She sat in her small quarters, reading everything she could find about draconian biology. She learned about how their eggs developed. She learned about their sensory processing. She learned about the differences between adult and infant neurology. At 3 in the morning, she found what she was looking for. Draconian eggs developed inside the mother for 2 years before being laid. During that time, the embryos floated in a warm, dark space, surrounded by the constant sound of their mother's heartbeat. 2 hearts, actually. All draconians had 2 hearts, and the steady rhythm of both would surround the unborn bobbies constantly. After hatching, the traditional practice was to place the bobbies in a carefully prepared nursery. Bright lights to help their scales develop color, many attendants to ensure their needs were met, formal ceremonies to bless their future. It had worked for thousands of years, but those were single births, one baby at a time, given individual attention, able to bond with caretakers one by one. The triplets had never had that chance. From the moment they hatched, they had been overwhelmed, and no one had thought to recreate the one thing that had kept them calm for 2 years, the quiet, the dark, the heartbeat. On the 5th day, requested a private audience with the emperor. The court expected her resignation, prepared the paperwork. The betting pool paid out to those who had wagered she would last less than a week, but did not resign. She stood before the emperor and empress with her notebook in her hands, her short hair still uneven from the fire, burn marks visible on her arms where the suit had not protected her. "Your children are not dangerous," she said. "They are overstimulated." The emperor's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "Every protocol you have established is designed for adult draconian psychology. Bright lights, loud announcements, formal ceremonies, multiple attendants. These things make sense for adults who understand what is happening, but your children are infants. Their sensory processing is not developed yet." She opened her notebook. For 2 years, they existed in warmth and darkness, listening to the Empress's heartbeat. Then they hatched and were immediately surrounded by light and noise and strangers. They have been in a constant state of terror ever since. And when baby draconians are terrified, they breathe fire. The emperor leaned forward. "You are saying we have been harming our own children." "Not intentionally. You followed tradition. But traditions developed for single births do not work for triplets. You have been accidentally overwhelming them since the day they were born." Silence filled the throne room. The emperor's claws gripped the arms of his throne so tightly the stone cracked. "What do you propose?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Did not look away. Let me try something different. Give me one night alone with them. No surveillance, no interruption, no protocols, just me and the hatchlings." "You will die," the empress said, her voice strained with worry. "Maybe," agreed, "but I don't think so. I think I know what they need. Please, let me try." The emperor was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "One night. If you are wrong, we will recover your body and find someone else." Smiled. It was a tired smile, but genuine. "Fair enough." The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Stood outside the nursery door, preparing herself. She had removed her fireproof suit. Instead, she wore soft clothes in muted colors, gray and brown, nothing bright, nothing that would catch the eye or alarm a frightened infant. In her hands, she carried only 2 things: a small device about the size of her palm, and a bag filled with something she had spent the afternoon making. Captain stood beside her, his expression troubled. "This is foolish," he said. "You have no protection." "That's the point," replied. "The suit scared them. Everything we brought into that room scared them. I need to be as non-threatening as possible." "You will be burned." "Probably," she smiled at him. "But I've been burned before. I can handle it." Shook his massive head. "Humans are strange creatures." "Yes," agreed, "we are." She ordered the lights in the nursery dimmed to a soft amber glow. Not dark, but gentle, like firelight, like the inside of a warm cave. Then she opened the door and stepped inside. The hatchlings reacted immediately, jumped to his feet, positioning himself between and his siblings. Smoke poured from his nostrils. Eyes glowed as she prepared to strike, and Ember began his terrible, heartbreaking cry. Did not advance. She did not speak. She simply lowered herself to the floor, making herself as small as possible. She sat cross-legged near the door, putting distance between herself and the frightened bobbies. Then she began to hum. It was a simple melody, an old earth lullaby that her grandmother had sung to her when she was very small. The tune was soft and slow, rising and falling like gentle waves on a calm sea. At first nothing changed. Continued to smoke, continued to glow, Ember continued to cry. But kept humming, patient, steady, calm. After a few minutes, she activated the small device in her hand. It began to project a sound through the room. A heartbeat. Actually, 2 heartbeats, layered together, just slightly out of sync. She had spent hours getting the rhythm right, matching the recordings of draconian biology she had found in the medical database. Then, the effect was not immediate, but slowly, gradually something changed. Ember's crying stuttered, stopped, started again but weaker. His head tilted to one side, her glowing eyes dimming as she listened. Smoke faded, his wings lowered slightly from their defensive position. Then, kept humming, she did not move, she did not reach toward them. She just sat there, a small, soft presence in the dim light making gentle sounds. An hour passed. Ember was the first to move. The smallest hatchling crept forward, one hesitant step at a time. His siblings watched but did not stop him. Something in the heartbeat sound called to him, something ancient and deep, written into his very cells. He reached and sniffed at her knee. She did not react, she kept humming. Slowly, carefully, Ember pressed his snout against her leg. He was warm, almost hot to the touch. Could feel the heat through her thin pants, but she did not flinch. For a long moment the baby dragon just stood there, his nose pressed against this strange creature who did not run, did not scream, did not fight. Then he made a new sound, not the high wail of distress, something lower, something almost like a question. Slowly, very slowly, reached into her bag. She pulled out one of the items she had made that afternoon, a blanket, but not just any blanket. She had filled it with sand, making it heavy, very heavy. She remembered reading about draconian hatchlings in the wild. They slept in piles, pressing against each other for warmth and security. The weight of siblings on all sides made them feel safe. She draped the weighted blanket over Ember. The small hatchling froze. Then slowly his whole body relaxed. His scales shifted color from the pale stress orange to something richer, warmer. He sank down against leg and let out a long, shuddering breath. Was next. The clever one had been watching carefully, analyzing everything. She had seen her brother approach the human and not be hurt. She had seen the blanket and the peace it brought. She crept forward, her movements precise and cautious. When she reached, she circled once, twice, then settled against her back, pulled another weighted blanket from her bag and draped it over the middle hatchling. Made a sound had never heard before, a low, rumbling purr of contentment. That left the largest, the protector. He stood alone now, watching his siblings cuddle against this impossible creature. His instincts screamed at him to stay alert, to stay ready for danger. But his siblings were calm. His siblings were safe. His siblings were making sounds of happiness he had never heard them make before. Then, looked at him, she did not speak, she did not gesture, she just waited. For a long, long moment, held his ground. Then step by step, he walked forward. He was too big to fit in her lap like his siblings. Instead, he lay down with his head resting on her leg, his body curled around the others. The last weighted blanket settled over him. And for the first time since they had hatched, all three hatchlings were calm at the same time. Stayed perfectly still, she kept humming. She kept the heartbeat device playing. Hours passed. The amber lights dimmed further as the night deepened outside. One by one, the hatchlings fell asleep. Real sleep, deep sleep. Not the exhausted unconsciousness that came after hours of terror, but genuine, peaceful rest. Ember snored slightly, little puffs of harmless smoke escaping his nostrils, twitched in her dreams, her claws flexing against imaginary prey. His tail curled around his siblings, protecting them even in sleep. Smiled. Her legs had gone numb an hour ago. Her back ached from sitting still so long. She was exhausted, but she did not move. She would sit here all night if necessary, all week, however long it took. Because three small creatures had finally found peace, and that was worth any discomfort. As dawn approached, finally allowed herself to close her eyes. She did not sleep deeply, staying alert enough to respond if the hatchlings woke, but she rested. Around her, three baby dragons dreamed their first good dreams. And the sound of heartbeats filled the room like a promise. Emperor did not sleep that night. He sat in his private chamber, staring at a blank screen. He had promised no surveillance, and he had kept that promise. But every minute that passed felt like an hour. Every silence made him wonder if the human woman was dead. The Empress sat beside him, equally awake, equally worried. Neither spoke. There was nothing to say. When dawn came, the Emperor could wait no longer. He rose from his chair and walked toward the nursery wing. Guards tried to follow him, but he waved them away. This he would do alone. He reached the nursery door and hesitated. No sounds came from within. No crying, no crashing, no roar of flames. Silence. His heart beat faster. Was she dead? Were his children hurt? Had something terrible happened in the night? He opened the door. The scene before him made him freeze in place. Lay on the floor, surrounded by his children. Ember was curled in her lap, his small body rising and falling with peaceful breaths, was pressed against her side, her clever head resting on the human's arm. Lay stretched out with his head on her leg, his massive tail wrapped protectively around his siblings. All three were asleep, all three were calm, and from Ember's throat came a sound the Emperor had never heard before, a low, rumbling purr. Opened her eyes and saw the Emperor standing in the doorway. She smiled tiredly. "Good morning, Your Majesty," she whispered. "Please don't make any sudden movements. They're still sleeping." The Emperor stepped into the room carefully. He moved slowly, keeping his movements smooth. When he reached them, he lowered himself to the floor, sitting across from the human woman with his children between them. "How?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Gestured to the small device on the floor beside her. Heartbeat sounds, two of them like their mother has. It reminded them of being in the egg. She touched one of the weighted blankets. And these, they need pressure like they would have from siblings in a nest pile. In the egg, they were surrounded by warmth and weight and that constant heartbeat. When they hatched, all of that was taken away at once. She looked at the sleeping hatchlings with soft eyes. They weren't angry or dangerous. They were grieving. They lost everything familiar and didn't understand why. The Emperor was silent for a long moment. He looked at his children, truly peaceful for the first time in their lives. Then he looked at the human woman, this small, fragile creature who had done what no one else could. "The Empire owes you a great debt," he said. "The Empire doesn't owe me anything," replied. "I did my job, that's all." Stirred, his eyes opened slowly and he found himself looking directly at his father. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the large hatchling made a sound, not a growl of fear, something softer, something curious. The Emperor extended his clawed hand, moving very slowly, watched it approach. His scales flickered, but he did not panic. He did not burn. The Emperor's claw touched his son's head for the first time since hatching. Leaned into the touch. Behind the Emperor, the Empress appeared in the doorway. When she saw the scene before her, tears fell from her golden eyes. She pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from making a sound that might disturb the bobbies. Smiled at her. "They're going to be okay," she said softly. "It will take time, they'll still have scared moments, but now that we know what they need, we can help them." Over the following weeks, transformed the nursery completely. The harsh lights were replaced with soft amber glows. The formal announcement system was removed. The walls were covered with soft, sound-absorbing material. Heartbeat generators played constantly, filling the space with gentle rhythm. She trained a new staff, chosen not for their ceremonial rank but for their calm temperaments. She taught them to move slowly, to speak softly, to approach the hatchlings without sudden gestures. She taught them about weighted blankets and the importance of physical contact. The hatchlings flourished, grew bigger and stronger every week. His protective instincts remained, but now he used them to watch over his siblings during play rather than in constant defensive terror. He still breathed fire sometimes, but now it was during excitement, not fear. Showed remarkable intelligence. She learned to recognize different sounds, different faces. She started solving simple puzzles made for her. Her fire came less often, and when it did, it was controlled, focused, the beginnings of the precision that would one day make her dangerous. And Ember, the smallest one, the runt who had spent his first months crying endlessly, he became a cuddler. He wanted to be held constantly. He followed everywhere, pressing against her legs, making his purring sound. Word spread through the Draconis Imperium and beyond. A human had solved the unsolvable problem. A human had saved the Imperial heirs. Ambassadors who had dismissed humanity began to reconsider. The Galactic Union saw requests for human medical specialists increase dramatically. Other species with difficult young reached out, asking for help, asking for training, asking to learn the human way of caring. Became the first non-Draconian in history to receive the Order of the Imperial Flame. The Emperor presented it to her himself, in a ceremony attended by representatives from 100 worlds. But the medal was just metal. What mattered more to was what happened after. When the ceremony ended, Ember broke away from his handlers and ran to her. He pressed against her legs, purring loudly, and refused to let her leave. The entire galactic audience watched as the mighty Emperor of the Draconis Imperium waited patiently while a human woman comforted his crying son. Months passed, the hatchlings grew, stayed. She had only planned to work for a year, maybe two, but every time she talked about leaving, something happened. Would bring her a gift, some shiny object he had found, would show her a new trick she had learned. Ember would cry until she agreed to stay a little longer. One evening, the Emperor found her in the nursery garden. The three hatchlings, now nearly as tall as herself, lay sleeping in a pile at her feet. She sat reading occasionally reaching down to scratch behind one of their ears. The Emperor sat down beside her on the grass. This would have been unthinkable once. The ruler of 1,000 worlds sitting on the ground like a common citizen. But things had changed. "I have conquered systems," he said slowly. "I have broken armies. I have bent civilizations to my will." He looked at his children, peaceful and content. "But I could not comfort my own Bobbies. How did you know what to do?" "Set down her." She thought about the question for a moment before answering. "Because humans spend the first years of our lives completely helpless," she said. "We are born unfinished. We cannot walk, cannot feed ourselves, can barely see. Everything we know about caring for the young we learned because we had to. We had no claws to protect our Bobbies, no fire to warm them, no scales to shelter them." She looked at the sleeping hatchlings with gentle eyes. "We just had each other, and we learned over millions of years that sometimes the smallest creature in the room understands fear the best, because we lived with fear every day. We became experts at comfort because comfort was all we had to offer." The Emperor was silent for a long time. The twin suns set behind the mountains, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Perhaps," he said finally, "the galaxy has underestimated your kind." Smiled. It was the same calm, pleasant smile she had worn when she first arrived. The smile that had confused guards and annoyed nobles. The smile that had become the most welcome sight in the imperial nursery. "Most people do," she said. "We're used to it." Ember stirred in his sleep. His claws flexed and a small puff of smoke escaped his nostrils as he dreamed. Reached down and patted his head gently. He settled immediately, his purr growing louder. The Emperor watched this simple gesture. A human hand on a dragon's head. Two species that should have had nothing in common, connected by something stronger than fire or scales or claws. Connection, care, love. Perhaps, he thought, these were the most powerful forces in the universe after all. And perhaps the humans had known this all along.